we focus on helping you claim what's rightfully yours, your health and your freedom. We explore the three main areas of health: the physical realm, the biochemical realm, and the mental and emotional realm. We also explore all the areas of lifestyle we can find that will help you live more abundantly, regardless of where you're starting. And remember, in life, you'll either make excuses or create results. You choose. I'm your host, Dr. Josh Hant, and I'm glad to be with you here today. Make sure to head on down to the show notes and click on the link to join our tribe of human-powered life heroes, where we'll update you on new shows, events, product launches, and so much more. Now, it's time to enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Human Powered Life Podcast. We have an amazing guest today, Jason Earle, and we're going to be talking about mold and a lot more. Jason, welcome to the show.
So good to be here.
I'm excited to have you. In my poking around, learning a little bit more about you, and we had a little pre-conversation about mold even in my life. And, you know, it was really interesting to see the impact on mold and people's health. And that's why I really wanted to bring you on. And I agreed to say, hey, this is actually a really, really important story to hear, because whether you live in a home in the suburbs like I do, or whether you live in an apartment in a city or in an old farmhouse like you said you grew up in, you know, people have the potential to be impacted and not even know they're getting impacted. It's like a silent thing. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear your version of your story here.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks again for having me. I also obviously did a bit of research on you, and you're an interesting guy, and I'm really grateful to be here. And you mold is a funny subject. It's I often say that it's a little bit like AIDS or cancer. It's one of those things that won't happen to me, and people mostly don't think about it much until it does, until it affects them or someone that they love, and then oftentimes they either become evangelists. They want to make sure that everyone else is making better decisions about this because they don't want to see anyone else suffer through that. But in almost all cases, it changes the way that they view the world. And, you know, mold is a very predictable thing. It's not something like lightning striking or like an earthquake. You know, it's a very predictable byproduct of extended dampness, and that's it. But, you know, it is one of those things that almost everybody I know that's in this space that does good work has a personal story. You know, they've become, they have this irreversible knowledge that they feel compelled to share. And so, you know, I'm no exception with that. My entry into this business was very accidental. It was actually after a successful career on Wall Street, that I had, an experience which brought my childhood into my awareness. And I had some significant respiratory illness as a kid, such that when I was around 4 years old, I lost 30% of my body weight in a 3-week period, and was having difficulty breathing. And my parents took me to the pediatrician, who said, no, you need to take him to the hospital. And so they brought me to the Children's Hospital, where they've got a renowned respiratory clinic. And their initial diagnosis, based upon my symptoms and based upon my family history, was cystic fibrosis. And back then, that was a death sentence. And it was particularly disturbing to my father, because he had 4 cousins who died from CF before the age of 14. So as I'm told, they spent the next 6 weeks crying while they were waiting for the second opinion. And they were grateful when they were told that I didn't have cystic fibrosis. Actually, I had asthma and compounded by pneumonia. And when they tested me for allergies, I don't know how they do it now, but they put you in a toddler straitjacket, like a papoose with an open back, and draw a grid on your back, and then, you know, put all these antigens on to see how you react. And my dad
scraping your skin, right, as a kid. I mean, that's why they put you in a straitjacket.
Yeah, no, it's one of my formative memories. Yeah, truly. I mean, it might be my first actual memory that I can go back to, and you know, I can still smell things from that memory. You know,
wow,
the clinical nature of, you know, those odors, the alcohol, and things like that. And my dad said I looked like a ladybug. My back swelled up, this big red bulbous back with dots all over it. And I essentially tested positive for every single thing they tested me for, every single thing. So grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, even cotton, soybeans. And that was, really tricky because I grew up on a little non-working farm, surrounded by grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, cotton,
Yeah.
soybean fields everywhere around me, corn fields everywhere around me. So I lived a very itchy life, for itchy, wheezy childhood, and mostly living on inhalers. And I spent a lot of time outside. That was it. I look back at that now, all these allergens outside, and I was allergic to pollen and grasses. I still have some dermal stuff once in a while from grasses. But I had no real problems that I could tell. I felt a lot worse indoors. And now looking back at that, my body was clearly signaling me that there was an issue with the indoor environment, so when my folks split up around the age of 12, all my symptoms went away. It wasn't immediate, but it was quickly enough that everyone around me noticed, and they said, "Oh, you grew out of your asthma just like Papa."
So moving out of the farm,
moving out of the house, yeah, it was. Suddenly, I was no longer allergic. Suddenly, I was no longer wheezing. I didn't have the chronic coughing and sneezing and phlegmy, all that stuff. And again, it was just dismissed as me growing out of my asthma, just some sort of like adolescent sort of emergence. And so fast forward, I had a series of circumstances that probably are better for another podcast. But my mom committed suicide a year and a half after we moved out. And then I got diagnosed with Lyme disease. So I got nailed with whole gargantuan doses of antibiotics, because this is the early 90s, before there was any sort of like established protocol. It was all kind of experimental back then. Lyme wasn't even really considered a real disease at the time. And then I missed a lot of school because of all of those things. And I dropped out of high school, and through a series of crazy circumstances, got recruited out of the gas station to go work on Wall Street. And did that for 9 years, had a wonderful career, and really enjoyed it. And then the dot-com bubble burst, and I went backpacking, looking for meaning, truly looking for purpose. I had spent my entire life looking for purpose on Wall Street, because my mom had really impressed upon me this idea of service. She dedicated herself to others, to her own demise, as a nurse, and as a healthcare provider. But that idea of service was something that was front and center in our world. And I always felt sort of hollow being a stockbroker, because the only people who benefited from my success were the people who owned the stores where I worked, really, or on the stores where I shopped, rather. And so when I was away, I was really looking for something that would enable me to do well by doing good. To be able to find something where I could improve the quality of other people's lives, and do something where they always say, if you find something that you really love, and that you'll never work another day in your life. And so while I was in Hawaii, I was reading one of the local newspapers, and I had a lot of time on my hands. I was reading all the local newspapers, and this one story jumped out. It was about a gentleman who had gotten sick from the hotel where he was an employee. Back then, this is 2001, 2002, the Hilton Kalia Tower, which is the Hilton's flagship property on Waikiki Beach, had been shut down for a mold problem. And initially they thought it was a $500,000 problem. And then as they began opening the walls, it went from $500,000 to $5 million to $55 million in total cost. And this had never occurred before. This is headlines all across the world, especially in the real estate news. But the story that got my attention, even though I was interested in the business side, was this one guy who'd gotten sick from the building. He had developed adult onset asthma, something I had never heard of before, as well as sensitivities to lots of different things that he had never had problems with. And it was a deja vu moment. It's the best way I can
sounds like
describe
something we've heard before.
Yeah, it was vaguely familiar. And so I immediately went and called my father from a payphone, which probably isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And said, "Hey, do you think we had a mold problem at Old Trenton Road?" And he just laughed at me. He goes, "Of course we had mold. There's mushrooms in the basement. Why do you ask?" And it was that it just was so flippant in a way. It was just like so dismissive. It was like, of course we had mold. and keep in mind that they also smoked indoors in the car, even with the windows closed. And that's the 70s and 80s. It wasn't for lack of love. It was just really for lack of awareness. And so I asked him, I said, do you think it might have been, contributed to my illness as a kid? And he goes, well, it certainly couldn't help. You'd have to know my father to really appreciate this, but it's also really just, it's so typical. The basement smell is just the basement smell. No, that's mold, right? Like that, our entire culture just woke up to this reality that stuff gets wet, gets moldy, and indoors, that's not good. That just became something that people are aware of. And we've been living on a water planet in buildings since the beginning of time, right? So it's just a remarkable time to be in this business, because as the the climate change and all of these other factors that are contributing to more dampness and more flooding and all those things, it's now being brought up so that no one can avoid the subject anymore. It is now, it's always been a 4-letter word, but it's one that is now being spoken a lot more often.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was telling you when we bought the house that I'm in right now that I'm sitting in, we're recording in. We had a friend come over he worked with homes, and he's like, listen, I just do a walkthrough with you just to make sure everything looks good, because I know inspectors are inspectors from time to time and they miss things. So he opens up our attic and literally he's like, goes, come up here. Just don't breathe too deep. Just come up here and look. And it was pitch black. I mean, not lighting, he put a light up there, but the walls were black. The insulation was shrunk. It was just I'm like, what is that? He goes, that's mold. He goes, you need that fixed. I didn't have a $55 million problem like you did. I think it was not you, but the hotel, I think it was something like 15,000 and a small ranch, an old home. I'm like, holy crud. That's nuts. So needless to say, it became very aware to me that it could be a problem. And when they have to have a special group of people come in to get rid of it, pay a ton of money to get rid of it because it can be that detrimental to health. I'm like, oh, all right. Well, it's a good thing we didn't live here and just, experience potentially what you had, as a child.
And it's so common that people live in these environments without any awareness of it, either because they've lived there for a long time or because during the home buying process, their inspector overlooks things. Or it's just really, I think that my job is really just to raise awareness about this, just to share with people what they need to know to better arm themselves. Because I look at mold as up there with death and taxes. It's a guarantee. If you haven't dealt with it yet, you will. It's just inevitable. And so I feel like it's important that people are armed with the knowledge. If you know how to, I don't even know if people balance their checkbooks anymore. Do people even write checks anymore? But it's the basic thing: change tires. Be able to do the basic things: boil an egg. You should know how to deal with a moisture problem so that you don't have a mold problem, because it's that simple. Mold is a moisture problem, and moisture problems are really easy and cheap to fix usually. Mold problems are incrementally, and I would even geometrically, more expensive, right? Yeah. So you end up with, and it's just a matter of days between free or cheap to cost prohibitive. And that's the big lesson here, is that mold is a moisture problem, and you only have 24 to 48 hours to respond to one before it becomes an issue that you have to bring in potentially professionals for, significant sums. Yeah. And there's no shortcuts on that, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, before we're going to get into what you've created and what you've done, but what did people used to do? What did the Hilton, what do people do to find out, besides getting a random illness? How would they be alerted to be like, okay, we have something going on, and who do I bring in to confirm that?
Well, so in Hilton's case, it was a maid. That just one of the housekeepers saw that the wallpaper had been peeling, and they had been getting complaints too. And their building defect was that they put a vapor barrier on the wrong side of the wall assembly. So in other words, it's very humid there, and water would get into the wall and got trapped. And it was the entire building. So it was a systemic building defect. This is not uncommon in residential structures as well, that there would be a systemic building defect. And it's especially prevalent in newer homes. This is counterintuitive. Most people think, I have an old house, probably has mold. New houses are more prone to mold problems because of the type of building materials, poor construction. The artisan is dead, so day labor. They're just not skilled, and they're using cheap building materials that are essentially mold food. We build buildings out of mold food, and I could talk more about that whole thing, about why modern construction is the recipe for this. We can talk about that a little more later. But the first clue for her was the peeling of the wallpaper, and then, as is typical with these problems, you begin opening up the walls, and it's Pandora's box. The more you open, the more you find. Mold loves to hide. It likes to. It tends to be in places that are out of sight, out of mind. Because of course mold really likes poor maintenance, right? Mold really loves deferred maintenance. Of all of the things that we do as humans, deferred maintenance is high on the list, and so those tend to be that tends to occur in places that are sort of out of sight, out of mind. And so it's not that mold is hiding from you per se, but it's going to proliferate where people aren't paying attention. And so as they began opening it up, they kept finding more and more. In all cases, what I suggest people do is engage your senses. If you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. And so what does that look like? You see something, any indications of water, staining, leaks, blistering paint, trim pulling away, those kinds of things. Water bugs, spider webs are indications of dampness, by the way. Most people think that the spiders are friendly, but they're eating something, and they have to eat little bugs, and little bugs need to eat littler bugs, and little bugs eat mold spores, and mold spores like water. So you've got a whole chain of events, or a whole ecosystem, nesting ecologies, actually, if you will, that all require a moisture source. So if you've got a moisture problem, you will see the critters come. It's a pool party, and everyone's invited. And so that you see something, you do something. If you smell something, and this is a big one, the musty odor is the dead giveaway. Mold produces this distinctive odor, which has very powerful health effects. The data and the research that's coming out on the musty odor alone is remarkable. I've seen this anecdotally for 20 years, where buildings that don't have any visible mold, even air samples come back clean with normal spore counts, but there's a musty odor and people are really sick, and you remediate it. And again, the musty smell goes away, spore counts are the same, and the moisture problem is corrected, and they get better. And I've seen this not once or twice, but I've done thousands of sick building investigations. And I've seen this hundreds of times and documented it many as well. So if you smell something, that is the hallmark of active mold growth. And I will also mention, it's just in terms of research, musty odor in a building is the second leading indicator of childhood asthma behind maternal smoking.
Wow. And
in fact, there's another study that showed that in infants, exposure to the musty odor increases their likelihood of developing asthma by 250%. That was out of the UK. I can also tell you that there's a correlation between mold and dampness and depression, according to a large study that was done by Brown University, 6,000 participants in that study. So really statistically significant.
Yeah.
And there's been interesting studies done by my friend, Dr. Joan Bennett at Rutgers, who use these special fruit flies that fluoresce when they produce dopamine. You can buy these by mail order, which is pretty cool. And she tested the musty odor, actually a specific mushroom alcohol that's in this musty odor. And they stop producing dopamine, they stop reproducing, they fly down instead of towards the light, and they develop Parkinsonian-like symptoms. And the most common complaints that people have from exposure to the musty odor, which are also called microbial VOCs, is headaches, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, brain fog, all that stuff, general malaise, depression. And so the Brown University study found a correlation, but Dr. Bennett found a much more direct link in terms of the animal studies. And that's since been replicated and expanded upon by numerous other researchers throughout the world. The musty odor is a big deal, and people have often, our entire lives, have just dismissed that as an uncomfortable aesthetic, as an aesthetic nuisance.
That's crazy,
right?
That really is.
Yeah. And all molds produce it, by the way. So the mycotoxins, which is the thing that most people worry about, most molds don't produce them. And even the molds that do produce them don't produce them very often. They produce them when they're under threat, when they're under stress, either because of, they're drying out or because there's competition. And basically it's chemical warfare on a microscopic level.
Hey, we're giving you a short break here where you can head down to the show notes or lifestylelocker.com and join our tribe of human-powered life heroes. You'll be the first to know about new shows, events, product launches, affiliate specials, and more. And now, back to the show.
But the musty odor is produced by all molds. And so worrying about toxic mold or black mold is a fool's game. It's a fool's errand. You worry about dampness because all molds produce these musty smells. In fact, Dr. Bennett now wants to call the volatile organic compounds the VOCs, which, by the way, alcohol is a VOC, right? Bleach has VOCs. VOCs are common. Formaldehyde is a VOC. Man-made VOCs are all around us, and they cause other problems. But the microbial VOCs have, again, long been dismissed, and she wants to rename them. Instead of volatile organic compounds, she wants to call them volatoxins, which is pretty brilliant. So see something, smell something, and then feel something. Feel something is symptoms. And people generally know if the building is causing them distress because they leave and they feel better. And so, if you're having symptoms that range from, mold is the great mimicker, really. It's sort of nebulous symptoms, but upper respiratory, dermal, headaches, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, things like that I mentioned before. But there's all sorts of other things that mold aggravates. It's inflammatory. It triggers other symptoms in people that might be latent. It sometimes brings out sensitivities like it did with me, where I was suddenly allergic to all these other things. But suddenly when I'm no longer being exposed to this great aggravator, this great inflammatory agent, all of those other latent sensitivities simply fell back and they self-suppressed. And so the symptoms part is a little bit more nebulous. But again, see something, smell something, or feel something, do something.
It's interesting. I'm thinking, with my chiropractic mind, I always bring everything back into the nervous system and my thought process. And, when we teach people about what we do, it is physical, chemical, and emotional stressors that impact people's livelihood, because whether your body's experiencing something from the external and or internal environment, and mold is that perfect or imperfect toxin that can really, really screw with that central nervous system, which, like you said, it's a great mimicker, can give all of these little symptoms. So someone may get like, I get headaches, and they just live on Tylenol, or they get, whatever. And then they screw up their liver and they cause something else from the Tylenol, but they're never really getting to that root source. And I think, now currently, because I don't have you share with this, it's a much more inexpensive way to find if you have a problem. But I love the find the dampness thing. It's like, I feel like I have to go to Costco right now and go buy like 6 dozen dehumidifiers, like for everywhere in the house. Not that I don't need to do that, but like, it makes me really start to think, obviously bathrooms and things like that, where you're showering, like these are areas that can definitely potentially be, hazards to your home if not taken care of.
No doubt about it. And so I, for that reason, I encourage people to arm themselves with simple tools. So, trust your senses, like I said, see it, smell it, feel it, but get the data. Because we're very lousy humidity gauges. Humans are not good. We actually literally don't have the senses for that. We only can do hot and cold. We think we can feel wet, but we can't. It actually shows up as cold. And we interpret it based on the context of the environment as wet. So we're not good at measuring humidity or even dampness. You put your hand on a wet wall, you can't tell the difference between a wet or a cold wall, even if you think you can. And so you use devices for that. And so humidity gauges are your best friend when it comes to monitoring the indoor environment. And you can get the wireless ones with an app on your phone. You can set an alert so that if it goes below 40%, which is minimum ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers. So they're the guys that make the guidelines on these things. And so if it goes below 40%, you're going to get dehydrated, and you're going to be susceptible to, because your mucous membranes will dry out, you're going to be susceptible to direct exposure to airborne microbes.
Yeah.
And if it's above 60%, you're at the risk of developing condensation and also other what they call water activity, which contributes to other allergens too, like dust mites and book lice and all the other critters. Like I said before, this whole these nesting ecologies that all come from that one moisture source. But you brought something up about the inflammation, about people treating the symptom, the headache, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been playing with this idea of mold, not as the enemy, but actually the messenger.
Mm-hmm.
So the building that you live in is a lot like a body. It's got a system of systems. It's got circulatory systems. It's got lungs, so to speak. And we're essentially kind of like the mitochondria. We're the powers. We're kind of making stuff happen in the house. The building needs us to survive, and we need the building to survive. There's a mutualism. You could even argue a symbiosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But playing with the building as a body, as a metaphor, when the building has a moisture problem, which is the first thing that happens when there's a maintenance issue or damage. The first thing that happens with the moisture issue is you get mold growth. It happens very quickly, again, 24 to 48 hours. And the mold sends you a signal. It sends you a signal in that musty odor. And much like the body, when you have a problem, sends you a signal, inflammation, pain and inflammation. If you don't listen to that, it will become chronic inflammation. That's its own disease, right? That contributes. The building does the same thing. It sends you a signal. Mold is telling you it's here. If you don't listen to that, it will get worse and worse and worse until it will ultimately want to take over your house. But if you answer to that, you deal with that as inflammation in the building, as a pain point, and you fix it. First of all, you saved yourself a lot of time and money. But also, when the building heals, guess what happens to the people who got sick from it?
They're going to get better too.
They heal too. So there is a real mutualism that if you care for the building, I would even argue the building's got a birthday and a death day potentially, and its longevity is determined by how well you care for it. I mean, this metaphor plays all the way through, and it's powerful because people tend to think about mold being the enemy, and actually mold's just doing its job. It's just trying to digest things and turn it back into dirt. And that we need that, otherwise we'd have piles of dead stuff everywhere. But it's not doing its job when it's doing that in your house, and it gives you the signals, and it's up for you to listen and then take the necessary actions.
Yeah, in the chiropractic world, they're saying this as nature needs no help, just needs no interference. But in this case, there needs to be that interference to nature taking place in the home, so we don't create that mold. So I'd love for you to share, like you've created a solution for people. Share, please. I think this is we're definitely there at this point, because people are like, all right, come on, tell me more. I need to know more. I'm saying that too.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so from Hawaii, I came back. I'll just quickly get into how there's a solution, but there's an important part. So I came back armed with a lot of curiosity, and I took a job working for a mold remediation company. There wasn't really a mold remediation company. They were doing mold remediation as part of another contracting firm. And I quickly saw that they were not doing the right thing. And then I looked at the industry and saw almost nobody was. There was no industry standard. There was no sort of guidance. I created a mold inspection company to help protect consumers from that. This is my way of creating a service business to answer that purpose, that itch that I was seeking. And so we'd heard about a guy who trained mold sniffing dogs, and I went and saw one. It was immediately enamored, and partnered with a dog named Oreo, who was so incredible. She and I did some really great work together for about 12 years, and we were on Good Morning America and Extreme Makeover Home Edition and hundreds of newspapers and magazines. We helped a lot of people. But and that company became 1-800-GOT-MOLD. We used to call it Lab Results because we used Labrador retrievers and did laboratory testing, and it was cute. But the company became 1-800-GOT-MOLD, which is still now 20 years old. And we serve a very affluent clientele, single family homes mostly. And our average inspections around $1,500, including lab fees. They can be more or less. And interestingly, cost prohibitive for many people, especially renters, except for maybe in Manhattan. But it was something that over the years we've taken tens of thousands of phone calls, and many people said, "Oh, I would love to hire you, but I just can't afford it." And the sad irony of that is that my own parents could not have afforded to hire my company, which I created to help families not go through what my parents went through. So, and that always bothered me. And about 4 years ago, it's actually, I started this in 2000. I started this, the experiment that I'm about to tell you about in 2007. But about 4 years ago, I dusted off some prototypes because I felt like the marketplace was ready. But basically what I wanted to do was figure out a way that we could take the ethics, the poor ethics out of the spectrum. Right now, it's hard to find a qualified contractor, a qualified inspector, and also to give people scientifically valid results that are cost effective. So I put together a dream team of scientists and engineers and designers to create a do-it-yourself test kit that allows people to test their air for mold without any of the costs or hassle associated with trying to find and hire a qualified, independent, reputable professional. And so that is the Got Mold test kit, which is at gotmold.com. And with that kit, you can collect air samples using a device called a spore trap, which is a round, specially engineered cassette that captures airborne particles. It interfaces with an air sampling pump, which we created, which replaces a $1,000 professional device. And we make it for a lot less than that, obviously, which you get to keep, by the way, when you buy a test kit. You get to keep it and retest. We now offer, you can test your air in 1, 2, or 3 rooms. The test kits start at $149. Here's our air sampling pump and the cassette that goes on top. They run for 5 minutes each. You take an outside sample, you take the inside samples in areas that you're concerned with. You submit the samples back to our lab partner in a prepaid mailer. And within 2 days at the lab, the report is released, and it's a very clear, easy to understand report that compares the samples automatically. So you get a green, yellow, orange, red indicator depending upon the severity of what's found. You also get the actual lab report, so a professional looking at this would actually be able to make sense of it, and then and see if our interpretation, if they agree with it. And then, of course, there's also action steps you can take in terms of how to find a qualified inspector, how to find a qualified remediator. We have an ebook that we called How to Find Mold, and a variety of other potential next steps that are informed by the results. And then once you collect those samples, you get to keep the pump. So if you want to retest, you can just buy refills, and then it's only $99 to test 1 room, $149 to test 2, and $199 to test 3. Beyond that. So that's the solution. So it doesn't replace a professional inspection. Let me make this clear. No test should, but what it does do is it gives you the ability to do this in confidence in your own home without getting permission from anyone, without having to schedule appointments. And you get the same quality results that you would get from a professional, if not better, because we partnered with the #1 lab in the country, MLab P&K. So you're getting a true accredited analysis from the top lab in the country. And then from there, you can determine whether or not you need to make that investment. Because oftentimes people need a little validation. Oftentimes they just need to know that they're not crazy, especially if someone in the house is disagreeing with their assessment of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, this would be, I'm thinking that not my business, but I'm thinking, holy cow, like if I was a home inspector and I came into your home with, a kit for like every room and be like, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but we're going to know right now within 3 days if the house you're looking at is worth buying or not. Like that, like, holy cow, like that's like such a value add. But had we had that done in our home, I would have known that before we put a bid in right off the start. Or not right bid, but like before we went to contract, like, type of thing. So it's a powerful thing. And obviously, I'm just thinking of my house now that we had all that stuff done. I wonder if there's anything that's lurking.
Well, we'll find out. We'll get you a kit, right?
Exactly. Right. Like, it's like, really? So this is really neat. So I'm glad to actually have you show it. Like, so for those of you that are watching the video, I've watched the video online of you sharing and going through the whole process, but it's really neat just to see that it's this tiny thing. It's like the size of, half of it's like a coffee mug. It's something that simple. So that's great, right? For those in New York City or any other city where you have, storage space is small, it's not going to take up a ton, right?
No, and actually, the way the kit is designed, it comes in a 7-inch cube, but then this is what you get. The pump actually comes in this box with a handle, so you can store it nicely or easily, or you can share it with someone else, and they can just order supplies. So this is especially designed for I lived in New York City for the last 7 years. We just relocated, as mentioned before we hopped on the recording here. And a lot of our business for 1-800 Got Mold is actually in Manhattan. Apartments have terrible problems with mold, mostly because landlords don't maintain as they should, and also dismiss it because many mold problems in apartments are actually caused by lifestyle. True. People drying clothes indoors, not a lot of Manhattan apartments don't even have proper ventilation. They just have those silly passive vents in the kitchens and bathrooms. They're oftentimes not even connected to the roof fan. So humidity is a major issue. A lot of those buildings are also, they've got their problems, but they also, and renters don't have the ability to take action on these things. They can't bring in a contractor. They can't. They've got to wait for the building maintenance staff who's just not informed on these things. They'll come in and spray some bleach and paint over it. That's what they're trained to do. That generational ignorance is really the best way to describe that.
I like that. Unfortunately, it makes sense.
Yeah, and so we created this kit in large part to serve that audience of the people that are renting. They're on a budget. Single moms come to mind. My mom comes to mind. She would have loved a product like this. And so this is really designed for, but there's a lot of people that live in big single family homes that just don't want to deal with all the nonsense, and they don't want to spend $1,000 to have somebody come over and be worried that they're going to take the data and use it against them too. It's a lot of these inspectors are also remediators on the side, or their brothers in the remediation business, and you just don't know. And once they have data, man, it's really easy to get scared into doing something that you might not normally do.
Yeah. And I would tell everyone that, if you, get to the point where our house that we're in now, like if you get to the point where you have that, your attic or your basement has filled with black mold, and this is not, I'm in, like, to give you an idea, this is, I think the main section of our house, the roof is like 1,300 square, it's like a 13 or 1,400 square feet. That was more than $1,000 a square foot to fix. And that's not including re-insulating. We found out that the hard way after our first power bill, when the remediation company didn't put insulation in. Like, why is our heating bill $600 for 1 month? Oh, yeah, it was going right. I was literally going at the roof. It was great. I mean, the no snow stayed on our roof, but nonetheless. So I would urge everybody to definitely check this out, because this could save you health, time, and definitely money for sure. In the long run, because if your health goes bad, you're going to spend money on that too, not just your building, your home or apartment. The first to see it. I take care of tons of patients in my practice, and I think this now may be something that we're just going to, recommend people at least check out for sure, because I think it's a big piece of the puzzle. And you said New York City is riddled with moldy apartments and buildings. So where's
every city is, I think.
Yeah. I imagine every city is. I mean, it's, like you said, it's old. Well, I don't know what you just said before, but it was a great line. But, it's like that age old, like, all right, we're just going to put bleach and paint on it and it's done. Then you won't smell anything anymore. But the problem is just now a layer deep. It's got to find
generational ignorance.
Generational ignorance. I mean, that's like the line of the day here. So Jason, where is the best place for people to find out more? I know you mentioned it a couple of times, but I want to make sure people, have a pen and paper handy and get this down, or just put this right in your phone.
Yeah, by all means. So we actually made a special page for your listeners at gotmold.com/human powered, which should be pretty easy for any of your loyal listeners. And on that page, you'll find a link to the ebook I mentioned earlier, How to Find Mold, which is about 45 pages of inspection checklists and FAQs, and it's something we get a lot of positive feedback about. It's especially helpful for anyone who's looking at this for the first time, that's having a hard time finding anything they trust online. If you're getting your mold advice from Facebook, watch out, right? It's all fear. If you're getting it from the internet in general, I would caution you, because there's just a lot of junk science, a lot of misinformation out there. And so we tried to create one that was distilled, and we're not selling anything in there. This is really just our way of helping to cut through some of the noise. And so you can find that ebook there. And then also there's a link to gotmold.com directly to the shop page there if you wanted to use the human powered 10 coupon code for a 10% discount on any of the kits. And of course, you could just go straight to gotmold.com if you wanted to and use human powered 10 as well. But that's all right there. And then if you want to get in touch with me, if you've got questions, you could go right to gotmold.com, and then the bottom of the homepage, there's a little field there where you can ask questions. I see every single one of those. And alternatively, we're just getting started on social media. We've been in stealth mode as we develop this. But now that we're out of stealth mode, if you want to post questions on Facebook, I love to answer questions publicly, so that everyone else can get the benefit of the answers. So cool. I'm pretty accessible. I'm not that hard to find.
Good. Well, everybody, Jason Earle, gotmold.com. This is awesome, Jason. This has been an awesome conversation. I want to thank you first and foremost. And for all of the listeners that are, have your earbuds in or in your car, you're going to head down to the show notes. You're going to click the link, get over to the website here at lifestylelocker.com, and you're going to be able to see the video of the whole thing and then the video that's going to be happening after this conversation. So Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Human Powered Life podcast. Make sure to head over to lifestylelocker.com to check out all the details on the show and to watch part 2 of this episode, which is only in video format. We also have this audio portion in video format if you want. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Josh Hant, for the Human Powered Life podcast, and I'm looking forward to staying connected with you as a Human Powered Life hero. Remember to join the tribe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.